think that we're in the downward swing. We're heading towards the collapse, and I don't think it can be stopped at this point, actually. I think
This
that
is
the things that would have to be done to stop it are so radical, considering the paradigm we're in, that we can't even countenance them. I mean, like, for example, women probably shouldn't be allowed to be teachers, is one of those things. Because, no, I'm not even joking. I'm not even joking.
I know. I know.
Because if you go back 300 years, they weren't allowed to be teachers, because there is a difference. You know, there is a difference in the style of teaching that men and women teach and teach in, and like mixed classrooms. There never used to be mixed classrooms. You know, boys used to be taught in a particular way in order to, like, you know, their schooling would be a lot rougher. You know, they'd be a lot physically tougher, and the punishments would be a lot rougher. And yet, this was good for their character, right? And now we're in a particularly feminized paradigm where now it's like, oh, well, we need to drug the boys. We need to give them, you know, they've got ADHD, you see. They need medication. Oh, we can't smack kids now. We can't do this. We can't do that. It's like, okay, but there is a consequence to all of this. You know, you are damaging their character growth in all of this. And so I've been quite, I guess, radicalized on that subject. The sort of, the way that our civilization is managed is incredibly feminine. And actually, I'd rather go back to a more rough, masculine kind of civilization that made young people aware of the closeness of suffering. Because that's the thing. Everyone thinks that suffering is a long way off now. And it's not good for us, actually. It makes us lazy. It makes us indolent. It makes us complacent. And actually, I think that's when the suffering is actually a lot closer than you realize. But the suffering is on a much bigger scale.
How long ago has it been? And the world's gone batshit crazy. Like, has it gotten worse or better in your neck of the woods over the pond?
So much worse. It's so much worse. Like, everyone can see that Britain is just declining, falling apart. Everyone can see it. And no one knows what to do about it either. No one has any solutions. And apart from Pete Hitchens, which is just flee, which I don't really want to do. So nobody knows what to do.
And flee to where? I mean, they just hiked up the interest rates to 5%. So mortgages are typically, I think it's prime plus 1.5. So like some people are paying 6.5% interest, which the standard argument is, well, it was worse in the 80s. They were paying 20%. But everybody has to appreciate, like, 6.5% interest on, take $500,000. That's a shit ton of money on interest alone. And people who were not locked in for 5 years now just saw their interest rates go from like 1.5% to 5%, which is
just on that. I completely, that's a great point that I should have nailed, because you see a lot of boomers saying, well, I had to pay 15%. Yeah, you paid 15% on 70 grand or something like that. They're expecting, 6% or 8% or whatever on 400 grand, so it ends up becoming just a lot more money in the long run. And that's, like you say, that's assuming it doesn't just keep going up. Sorry, you're completely right on that.
No. But and some people are going to say, well, 15% on 100,000 back then, money was worth less, but it was also a proportion to annual salary. Where, from what I understand now, homes are like 10 to 12 times someone's annual salary. Typically, where back in the day, I don't know, it was like 4 to 6, maybe 4 on those numbers.
It was 4 times in the 90s. Not even that long ago, within living memory, 4 times.
It's crazy. And in Canada as well, can't pay for healthcare.
I saw stats the other day that said that 25% of the school children in London are English, whereas 75% are non-English. And you think, okay, well, London is actually a relatively sort of fixed size place. It's a geographic location. So if you've removed 75% of the English population and replaced them with 75% non-English population, it doesn't have to be a conspiracy to call that a replacement, because the geographic area is the same. So they are not the same people there. And this gives the city a distinctly different tone. But we're at the point now where a quarter of the people living in England aren't English. So as you can imagine, and in this, we've reached a population in England and Wales of about 70 million, I think it is. 60 million in England and Wales, and so 70 million in the UK overall. And given in the 90s it was 55 million, you just imagine the burden on infrastructure that hasn't been repaired since my parents were children, hasn't been improved since my parents were children. Like, all of this was built with about 50 million people in mind. So the roads are constantly congested. The trains are constantly congested. They're constantly late. But now we have a totally different system where it seems to be literally anyone who applies is just, boom, rubber stamped. Here's a visa. And so that means we get, I don't know what to describe them as, like the nomads of globalism, essentially, because they're from everywhere. Like, weirdly, we get North Africans over here. And so I was walking through my town centre the other day, Swindon, just a small, well, not small, it's a relatively large town, but it's a nowhere place, right? It's nowhere that if you were thinking about travelling the world, you'd be like, yeah, I hope I end up in Swindon. And I walked past 3 separate groups of North Africans speaking French. And I was just thinking to myself, how the hell is it you didn't end up in the French equivalent of Swindon? You know, if you're going to end up in like a place like Swindon, a small town sort of thing, why did you come to the English version where you can't speak to anyone? You know, how did this even happen? We didn't have an empire in North Africa. That was the French. Why do we have these people here? And so we've got people from literally everywhere. And you walk through like my town centre, but you can do this in basically any town centre now. And you'll hear Eastern European accents, what I assume are like, I don't know, Balkan or something, Central European. You'll find obviously subcontinental. You'll see Chinese, not much from Latin America actually, which is interesting, but almost everywhere else, loads of Africans, loads of Somalians, and it's just like, why are these people here? And you can tell, they're sitting around all day, every day, just in the town centre, just sitting around doing nothing. So they don't exactly have jobs. And it's like, okay. So we actually know, in a way, which ones are the illegals and which ones aren't. The illegals are what we call the boat migrants, the criminal migrants who just break into our country across the English Channel by getting on a boat that presumably the French government provides them. And we pay for them. We put them in hotels. And so if, for example, if you wanted to book a hotel in the centre of Swindon, you wouldn't be able to. And you can just go and look this up. Just go and look up, I can't remember the name of the hotel, a Holiday Inn or something, in the centre of Swindon. And it's just booked up in the foreseeable future. Like, for as long as you are allowed to book into the future, every room in this hotel is booked. And it's filled with Afghans, Somalians, just like whoever, Iraqis, whoever has come across in these boats. And they're all young men. Right, they're all young men. They're being paid for by the British taxpayer, and when you walk past them, they have new bikes. They have new clothes. They are sitting around smoking and drinking and just doing nothing. It's like, why am I paying for this? These are not asylum seekers or refugees. These are adventurers who have come to see parts of the world unknown and to get the money that they knew that we were going to give them. It comes from this particular managerial mindset where the only thing that's important is the GDP of the country. And so they've turned our countries into economic zones. Like, they used to be homes. They used to be where we lived. They used to be something we were emotionally attached to. And the current managers of our civilization have decided, yeah, but I've got books to balance, and therefore, I've got pensions to pay for. I've got social services to pay for. I've got the NHS.
It's outrageous. Is it? Do people feel the despair? Like, do you walk around? Are people largely unaware of this, or
no? Everyone's very aware that their groceries have doubled in price. Everyone's very aware that it costs twice as much to fill their car, and that it costs twice as much to heat their homes. And there's a general sense of despair. Like, I just look at people when I'm wandering around, and people just walk around with their heads down, and they look generally quite sad.
The mayor of London, is it still Sadiq Khan?
Yes.
And how has London got? I mean, with no exaggeration, the crime. I think I know the stats. Has crime gotten worse?
Bad, yeah. It's the thing about crime in London is that it's essentially legal now. They prosecute something like 5% of burglaries. So you've got if you rob your neighbour's house, you've got a 95% chance of getting off. Not even being investigated.
Well, so, you have 95% chance of getting off, as in not being investigated.
Yeah, as in not being investigated. Yeah, not even going to court over it, right? like bike thefts. They just don't bother investigating these things anymore. And so crime has just been essentially made legal in London. It's very unlikely that you will be in trouble if you commit a relatively minor crime, like thievery or burglary or something like that. They do find themselves still, probably disappointingly, compelled to investigate murders, though. So thank God for something.
Well, I'm trying to see what the stats are now. It says 83.2 crimes per 1,000 people, which includes violent crimes. The thing is, the thing that's funny though, it's like everybody sees it in front of their faces. You go to San Francisco, you see it, but they tell you that crime is down, and it's not. And it's like Orwellian figuring, Orwellian counting. Nobody's reporting crime, so the crimes go down because nobody reports it. They don't convict, therefore. But everybody knows it's not.
But the Conservative government here is heading for a historic defeat. The worst defeat that had ever been suffered in British history was in 1997, where the Labour Party took the government away from the Conservatives, getting, I think it was about 418 seats out of 650, which is a massive, massive win. And it put the Conservatives in the wilderness for like 3 elections, which was terrible. And the Conservatives are on track to get a worse defeat than that at the moment, because they are literally just selling our country out.
To whom are they going to get the defeat, though? Is it going to be a right-wing party?
No, the Labour Party. It'll be a left-wing party.
So you're going from the frying pan. What I don't know what the expression is. You're going from the fire to the frying pan.
Yeah. It's out of the frying pan into the fire. But I mean, if it helps, right? So so what we operate under a paradigm that is called Blairism, named after Tony Blair, who instituted the way that British politics works and has worked for the last 25 years. And the Conservative Party have been totally captured by this paradigm. They don't even realize why this paradigm is bad and why it's ruining them. And the people who instituted it, Tony Blair himself and the others around him, actually were not as bad as the Conservatives at doing what they're doing. I mean, they would bring in 500,000 people a year, and the Conservatives have decided they have no other options than to bring in more than that. And so they're bringing in 1 million. Tony Blair would spend X amount on the NHS, and the Conservatives are like, well, we're just going to have to spend more, because the problems that began piling up under the Blair administration have just compounded over the years. And so now the Conservatives are faced with a much worse circumstance that they simply have no tools to fix, and no political will to fix, should I say, because they're afraid that doing what must be done is going to look right-wing. They're just afraid of being called right-wing, even though they are supposed to be the Conservative Party, and they're supposed to be preserving this country. They're supposed to be improving this country. And so they are afraid to step outside of the bounds of the Blairite paradigm, and this is literally destroying their party. It's annihilating them. And so I'm quite looking forward to it. I'm tired of the Conservatives being just traitors to Britain. I mean, don't get me wrong, Labour are awful. They were traitors to Britain before it was cool, but at least they were traitors who were worried about keeping their heads on their shoulders, whereas the Conservatives seem to be just totally off and be like, look, it doesn't matter that out of the entire electorate, the Conservative Party are about down to 1/5 of the voters. Like, it doesn't matter to them. They are going to get the worst shellacking they've ever had of any party in all British history. And Rishi Sunak is like, right, to boost people's morale, I'm going to have a barbecue and invite all the Conservative MPs. Like, bro, you might want to think of something a bit more serious than a barbecue. Like, it's embarrassing. You're going to get destroyed. You're going to go down in history as the worst Prime Minister they've ever fielded. And then we're going to have another 5 or 10 years of bloody Labour ruining this country. So, I mean, it's done. I guess it's done.
The silver lining or the white pill to that is they're going to get the shellacking because they're not true conservative or conservative enough. Yeah. But in the meantime, it's like, Carl, if you can imagine this, in the province of Ontario, the Conservative Party are called the Progressive Conservatives, which I always thought is an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms. And then you got your federal Conservatives who are, I mean, they voted unanimously to approve a law which is a ban on conversion therapy, which basically prohibits parents, psychiatrists, psychologists from talking people out of transgender.
I don't know, the CEO of Boeing or something, and go, your company's racist. Like, oh my God, well, we're not racist. What are you talking about? We hire on merit. It's like, exactly. Look how many black people you don't have working for you. Look at how many women you don't have on your board. And they're like, oh God, we're sexist, we're racist. And it's just, right, okay, now they've lost the argument, and now the activists can make their demands, and now the cycle goes on as we all have seen it going on, right? And so it was a very clever attack from within the house of liberalism that has led us to intersectionality. So it is divide and conquer, but it's not really to do with the 2030 agenda. It's just that these things end up kind of harmonizing, because I think really they're both materialistic philosophies. So they're both concerned about power and wealth, basically. They're the only concerns they have. And so they link up quite nicely. And so the World Economic Forum has gone woke. I mean, if you go back like 4 or 5 years, you can see that they don't really, or probably a little bit longer than that, they don't really talk about intersectionality. But if you look now, they've got loads of intersectionality articles, because it just completely fits within the logic of liberal materialism. And so it was kind of inevitable that essentially anything that also already uses that logic will become woke eventually. That's the short answer.
It's an answer that I'm snipping and clipping when this stream is over. I had only first heard the term intersectionality through Tim Pool. Mm-hmm. And, though I grew up hearing the term Marxism and communism, mm-hmm. my goodness, I've never fully appreciated how it works in action. I mean, we're witnessing it, and not hyperbolically. It's like, it always sounded crazy to say that's a communist theory. It's communism. The greater good, open board. I mean, it's communism.
Well, you've got to remember that their constituency is all of humanity, which they believe is utterly homogenous at base, right? All humans are essentially the same, and any differences between us are, drum roll, social constructs, right? And so all people all over the world are all the same, really. It's just the oppressive nature of the systems of their civilization that make them different. And therefore, if we can have a sort of universal communism, then, well, all of those things disappear, and we all get to be utterly liberated and do whatever we want all the time and have no boundaries and no restrictions. So, right. But that actually sounds like hell, actually. It sounds terrible. And then we lose a lot of the good things that we had, because actually, if you think about it, the only things worth having are those things that are not available to everyone. Exclusivity is where value comes from, as any economist will tell you. If something is available to everyone, it's worth nothing, and no one will pay for it. It's the most basic, like, economic calculus, but that comes to any kind of value, like moral value, entertainment, anything that you find desirable is something that is just not for everyone. It's got to be for certain people and to exclude other people. And so the intersectional sort of woke agenda is the abolition of all boundaries. So everything is for everyone, which makes everything really shit. And it's totally undesirable, but they don't know how to stop themselves, because they believe they're on a moral crusade, basically, because this has taken on sort of theological dimension for them. And so look at the activist movements that we're currently dealing with. They do look slightly like Insanity Manifested, don't they? The very nature of being a human becomes the barrier to them. Like, notice that the entire trans movement is predicated on the human body being the obstacle to happiness. And it's like, right, I think there's a problem there in the way you're conceiving of the world if your own body is an obstacle to your happiness.
It is also, it's a non-judgmental, but judge if you want. It's an empirical observation. I've now been to a sufficient amount of protests, counter-protests, and you see the movement. It's not to say it's normalizing mental illness, but it's certainly institutionalizing it. And then the people who cater to this new movement themselves, whether or not they suffer from it, they certainly encourage it and operate by it, because it's how they retain power.
They certainly over-index in it, right?
Explain what you mean by over-index.
There's a higher frequency of people suffering, and they'll put it in their Twitter bios. They'll list their mental illnesses in their Twitter bios, and then they'll put the flags that represent the movements they support next to them. Most normal people don't. So,
as to whether or not legislation is the way to resolve this, Robert rightly points out, legislate that transgender or gender affirming care is child abuse. Soon enough, some legislator somewhere is going to say not doing it is child abuse, and then you're in the vicious circle of how do you resolve the problem?
And the legislation that's going to say that will be Canadian.
It'll be California. Oh,
Or
it
Canada.
is. We have it. I mean, like you
I know
about it, but it's they call it the conversion therapy ban. It's Bill C. It's 1416. It's one of these bills. It might be Bill C4, officially prohibiting conversion therapy, but only when it's trans to cis, to use the slur, not the other way around. So it's nuts.
That's not a form of conversion. You know, that's correct and saintly and should be done under all circumstances. And it's just, man, we are in a mad era, but it's not going to last, and there will be a collapse. And you know, I've become a kind of the sort of person who's decided that history is cyclical these days. I think that history has these cycles where you have a civilization that starts in poverty and despair, and then works its way up to glory and greatness, and then from that, the conditions that required the people in the civilization to be good, virtuous, hardworking, and self-sacrificing disappear through the virtue and self-sacrifice of those people. And so their great-great-great-grandchildren don't understand why they needed to do the things that they did in order to have the wonderful things that we have, and they become people of inferior quality. They're not as smart, they're not as well educated, they're not as driven, they're not as disciplined, and that matters. The constituent parts of the civilization matter, and these people begin the downward decline of that civilization by just simply not being as good as the people who came before them, until whatever system you've got just simply can't take it anymore, and then you get to the collapse at the bottom, and then you're back into the original position of suffering, deprivation, hardships. And out of that, a new tradition of hard work, discipline, self-sacrifice, and virtue occur again. And I think books now, it doesn't really matter. No one's playing by the rules. Everyone is just covering and making sure they don't get stabbed. You know, and it's just like, right, okay, is that the kind of civilization you want to fucking live in? You know, I don't want to be trapped in a civilization with the left. I mean, especially in America, they're just so unbelievably open about how much they hate the Republicans and how much they will do everything they can to ruin them. You know, every single statement is the Republicans are pure evil and have to be destroyed. So, okay, why do we live in the same country? You know, I don't want to wake up and have to deal with people who want to destroy me all day, every day. I mean, in Britain, it's bad, but it's not that bad, you know. There's at least an understanding on the left that it's like, well, hang on a second, we are meant to be the loyal opposition, aren't we? You know, we are meant to be like, yeah, these are our countrymen. But in America, you don't get that because it's a social contract country. And so it's like, right, I've got a set of rules, and if I push right up until the limit of these rules, then I've done nothing wrong. It's like, no, you have. You're operating directly against the interests of your own countrymen, you know, your fellow citizens. You're trying to ruin the people you live next to. Why? That's just because legally you might be allowed to do it doesn't mean you fucking should. You know, be a human for 5 minutes. And so, but they can't, obviously, because they're on this wild leftist crusade. And so, like, the fiction of, like, the United States is, like, I mean, people are already talking about, like, the national divorce. So it's obviously over. It's obvious that the left won't tolerate living in a country with the Republicans, right? And you can't live together. Like, the very notion of a country is it's a group of people who agree to share a land together. And if the Republicans are like, well, we would like to, but they don't seem to follow the rules, and the left are like, you're Nazis, we want to kill you. Okay, well, you don't have a country. What you have is kind of an occupation, you know, where you've got like the Israel-Palestine sort of thing, where you've got to build a big bloody wall between you to make sure the two sides don't end up fighting. And it's these are not countries anymore. That's the problem.